Iraha same cheese sita chat main. Ek high paragraph main. Copy-paste Kalia. The moment Gerald Whitfield laughed in my face across that boardroom table, something in me went quiet. Not hot. Not shaking. Quiet. That's the part nobody understands about real anger. The kind that's been sitting under the surface for years doesn't scream. It just settles. It gets patient. And by the time it moves in silence because it already knows exactly what it's going to do. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I let him finish laughing. I nodded once, and under the edge of that table, I picked up my phone. The message took me 12 seconds to type. Whitfield Development Group was a company worth roughly $48 million. Their emergency board meeting started 8 minutes after I hit send. I know the exact number because I checked my watch when I walked out of that building. Let me back up, because if I don't tell you how we got there, you're not going to understand why I felt nothing when it finally happened. Not triumph, not rage, just a strange, clean stillness, like a rope finally going slack after years of being pulled tight. My name is Marcus Kane. I'm 38. I run an investment firm called Kane Capital Partners out of a converted warehouse building in Denver, Colorado. We manage just under $310 million across a handful of funds, real estate, infrastructure, a small but aggressive growth portfolio. I built the firm from nothing, one deal at a time, starting in a rented office above a dry cleaner. I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you because in a few minutes you're going to need to understand one simple fact. Gerald Whitfield had 4 years to learn who I was. He never once bothered to ask. I met Elena at a charity gala in downtown Denver almost 6 years ago. She was standing near the silent auction table in a navy dress, holding a glass of champagne she never touched. She had this way of commanding a room without trying, and when she finally caught me staring, she didn't look away. I liked that immediately. We dated for nearly a year before I met her parents. Gerald Whitfield had inherited a small commercial construction outfit from his own father and, over 3 decades, turned it into a real estate development company with projects scattered across Colorado and into Utah. He was the kind of man who filled a room the second he walked into it. Not because he was impressive, but because he made sure you knew he thought he was. The first time I had dinner at the Whitfield house, a sprawling place on the water outside Boulder, complete with a boat dock Gerald mentioned no fewer than 3 times. He shook my hand, looked me over the way men do when they've already made up their mind, and said, "Elena tells me you're in finance." He said it the way you'd describe someone who restocks vending machines. "I run an investment firm," I told him. "Little operation?" he asked, smiling. "We manage about $230 million right now," I said. "Growing." He gave me the same smile he'd give a child who just said something cute. "That's nice," he said. "Takes real time to build something serious." I looked at him. I looked past him at the boat dock. "Yes, sir," I said. "It does." And I let it go. That time. Elena and I married a little over a year later. I paid for most of it because Gerald kept promising to contribute and then kept finding reasons the timing wasn't right. Elena told me it didn't matter. It mattered. I just never said so. The first 2 years of our marriage were good ones. Elena worked as a director at a healthcare marketing firm, sharp and observant in a way I admired, except when it came to her own family. There, her clarity seemed to vanish completely. Gerald called me directly for the first time about 18 months into the marriage. Not to check in, to ask for money. Whitfield Development had a liquidity problem on a retail project outside Salt Lake City. Their lender had gotten nervous over a zoning issue nobody had caught before closing. 3 years of work and several million in pre-development costs were about to disappear. "Do you know anyone who might be interested in short-term bridge financing?" he asked. Not "could you help?" Not "would you consider it?" "Do you know anyone?" Like I was a switchboard operator instead of family. I told him I'd make some calls. Instead, I had my team run a full analysis within 48 hours, the site, the zoning exposure, the lender relationships, comparable deals in that market. I came back with a real proposal. Bridge capital from Kane Capital, structured as preferred equity, generous terms, protective conditions tied to the zoning resolution. It was honestly a better deal than he deserved. He sat on it for 11 days. Then he called to say they'd gone a different direction. Some private lender a business associate had introduced him to. When I asked about terms, he got vague in that specific way people do when the terms are worse and they don't want to admit it. "We appreciate you looking at it," he said. Then, "Family's family, Marcus. But business is business. You understand." Elena told me not to take it personally. I told her I didn't. I did. Not because he chose someone else, that was his right. It was the phrase. Family's family, business is business. A clean little wall. His family on one side, his business on the other. And me, somewhere outside both, useful in theory, never quite let in. For 3 years, that philosophy showed up in 100 small ways that meant nothing individually and everything together. Family dinners where every conversation orbited Whitfield development. Gerald nodding at whatever I said the way you nod at a child describing a school project, waiting for his turn to talk about something that mattered. Once, at a holiday dinner, I mentioned we just closed a mid-market acquisition I'd spent 7 months structuring. One of the cleanest exits my firm had done in 2 years. Gerald looked up from his plate. "Good," he said. "Keep building that track record." Like I was an intern. I was 36 years old with a resume most men in his industry would have envied. Elena squeezed my hand under the table. I smiled. I ate my food. I said nothing. That was the pattern. That was always the pattern. The call about the board meeting came through Elena, which should have told me everything before I ever walked into that room. Gerald had been approached about a major mixed-use development downtown. Residential towers, retail, a hotel component. A $380 million project that would triple the size of his company overnight if he could find the right capital partner. Someone with institutional relationships. Someone with credibility. Someone who did, professionally, exactly what I do. Elena brought it up over dinner, practically glowing. Her father had been thinking about it for months. He wanted to know if I'd be interested in getting involved. He hadn't called me. He called her. And she had carried the message to me like it was a gift he was finally offering, which told me nothing about how he saw me had actually changed. I said I'd hear him out. The meeting was in Gerald's downtown office, 14th floor, a view of the river if you leaned toward the window at just the right angle. Gerald sat at the head of the table. His son Trevor sat beside him in a suit that fit better than his understanding of the deal did. A CFO named Diane sat with a folder of documents. A financial advisor named Roy Bennett, whose competence I clocked within the first 10 minutes, rounded out the group. Gerald pitched the project well. He was always good when the subject was himself. Site details, market fundamentals, projected returns. A solid pitch for someone who didn't know which questions to ask. I knew exactly which questions to ask. I pressed on the capital structure, the waterfall, the preferred equity position. Whether they had pre-commitments on senior debt. Roy fumbled some answers. Diane covered for him with more precision. Then Gerald turned to me. "Marcus, walk us through what involvement from Kane Capital would look like." I did. 15 minutes, no wasted words, capital commitment size, timeline, the institutional relationships that would let them access lower-cost debt. I was specific because I'd already run the numbers before I ever sat down. When I finished, Gerald leaned back. He looked at Roy, then at me, and he smiled the same smile he'd worn at every family dinner for 4 years, the smile of a man who'd already decided something before I opened my mouth. "Marcus," he said, "what you're describing sounds like a meaningful contribution to a project this size." A pause, calculated for effect. "But I want to be straightforward. We're looking for a partner at the $50 million commitment level. Institutional scale. Someone with the balance sheet to anchor the raise." He tilted his head. "That's a different conversation than what your firm typically handles, isn't it?" I looked at him for a long moment. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "Your firm does good work," he said, spreading his hands, generous and condescending in the same gesture. "But this is a $50 million business we're building. A different tier." Elena went completely still beside me. Trevor shifted in his chair. Diane looked down at her folder. "Gerald," I said, calm and level, "I manage over $300 million in assets right now. My network includes institutional relationships capable of funding this deal several times over. I've structured transactions larger than this one. He nodded the way he always nodded. Not listening. Processing and discarding whatever didn't fit the picture of me he'd already built. Then he laughed. Not cruel. Not loud. Just easy, dismissive, the laugh of a man amused by something he doesn't take seriously. Marcus, we appreciate you being here, he said. Elena tells me you've built something over there. But we don't need pocket change on a deal this size. Come back to us when you've got institutional weight behind you. He turned to Roy. Let's talk about the Hartman timeline after lunch. And that was it. I was dismissed. The meeting rolled on around me. Trevor uncapped a pen. Diane opened her folder. Elena's hand found my knee under the table. But I was already somewhere else. Somewhere quiet and very, very still. I looked at Gerald Whitfield across that table and I made my decision. I slid my phone from my pocket and typed a single message to my operations director, a man named David Reyes. Withdraw all backing from Whitfield Development immediately. Freeze the preliminary commitment letter on the downtown project. Do not process anything further until I call. Move now. I sent it at 1:47 in the afternoon. The emergency board meeting at Whitfield Development started at 1:56. Here's what Gerald Whitfield never bothered to find out. Kane Capital had been quietly positioned as the lead equity arranger on his downtown project for 3 weeks before that meeting. David had sent a preliminary term sheet to Diane's office 2 weeks earlier. We were already in contact with the developer, a firm out of Salt Lake City, about our formal role. We had institutional investors soft-circled, the industry term for capital that's essentially already committed in principle. Without our participation, the capital stack for that entire project didn't exist. Gerald knew we were involved. He'd asked Elena to reach out to me. He'd invited me into that room. What he apparently never did was ask anyone what our involvement actually meant. Whether Roy simply hadn't read the documents, or Diane hadn't shown him, or Gerald had already made up his mind long before I sat down. I'll never know for certain. It doesn't change what happened next. I walked out of that building at 2:04. Elena caught up with me in the hallway, her face caught between two versions of the same conversation. He didn't mean it the way it sounded, she said. Elena, I said, not angry, just precise. How long has your father known what I do for a living? She looked away. For years, I said. He's had 4 years to ask one real question about my work. He never did. She didn't have an answer. She wore the expression of someone finally seeing something she'd spent years avoiding. I kissed her forehead and told her I had calls to make. David confirmed it before I even said a word. It's done, he said. Commitment letter retracted. The developer's been notified we're on a strategic hold. I flagged it with our institutional partners too. They were set to co-anchor with us. Good, I said. They're not going to be happy, David said carefully. No, I agreed. They're not. The developer called Gerald directly less than an hour later. Elena called me not long after that, her voice carrying the particular strain of someone standing inside a building where everyone had just realized something had gone badly wrong. Without Kane Capital's arrangement, the entire capital structure for the downtown project was in question. The timeline couldn't hold. Institutional investors who'd been circling began quietly stepping back. Gerald called me at 3:19. I let it ring. He called again at 3:24. I let that ring too, not out of spite, but because I was on the phone with one of our institutional partners, walking her through what had actually happened. The third call came at 3:51. I was driving north, on my way to a dinner meeting. I answered. Marcus. His voice was different. Not the boardroom voice. Something underneath it, straining to stay composed. I understand there's some confusion about the capital arrangement, he said. There's no confusion on my end. A long pause. I'm told Kane Capital has withdrawn from the project. That's correct. Why? I watched a line of birds cross the highway ahead of me. Gerald, I said. You told me today this was a $50 million business and you didn't need my pocket change. I agreed with you, so I removed it. That's not what It's exactly what you said. I was in the room, in front of your CFO, your advisor, your son, and my wife, you laughed at me and moved on to the next agenda item. Silence. I decided to take your advice, I said. Leave the big deals to people with institutional weight. The silence that followed had a temperature to it. I actually checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. We need to talk, Gerald said finally. Something had gone out of his voice, the certainty mostly. I'm free Thursday, I said. David will send a calendar invite. I hung up. Gerald came to Denver on Thursday. He didn't call Elena first. He didn't ask to meet at the house. He called David directly and asked for 30 minutes at our offices. I want you to picture that office for a second, because I think it matters. Kane Capital's floor isn't flashy. It doesn't need to be. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the east side that fill the room with clean morning light. A live performance board in the conference room that David updates every day. No trophies. No noise. The kind of quiet that only comes from a place that stopped needing to explain itself years ago. Gerald stopped in the doorway when they brought him up, just for a second, taking in the room the way Elena sometimes did without meaning to. Then he walked to the table and sat down across from me. David was the only other person there. I owe you an apology, Gerald said before I'd said a word. I waited. What I said in that meeting wasn't an accurate reflection of your capabilities. I was speaking loosely. I should have chosen my words more carefully. You laughed, I said quietly. Not cruel. Just true. He held my eyes. I did. In front of your CFO. In front of your son. In front of Elena. Yes. I let that sit for a moment. Gerald, I've been married to your daughter for 4 years. In that time, I've asked you for nothing. I offered to help with the Salt Lake project once. You turned it down. I've sat across from you at more dinners than I can count. Answered every question about my work, and watched you nod without ever once actually hearing me. I paused. Last Tuesday, you had a choice about how you spoke to me in that room. You made one. He didn't respond. Can we fix this? He finally asked. That was the real question. Everything since 1:47 that Tuesday had been building toward it. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't triumph. I've thought about this a lot since, and I want to get it right. I didn't feel like I'd won something. What I felt was tired. Tired of being an afterthought in a family I'd spent 4 years trying to belong to. That's up to you, I said. I want to make it right, he said. I know what the project needs, I told him. I've known for 3 weeks. That's not what I'm talking about, he said. I waited. I'm talking about the fact that you've spent 4 years deciding who I am, I said. And you were wrong. And the only reason you're sitting here now is that a project you care about is in trouble. Not because you woke up one morning and decided to actually understand your son-in-law. The longest silence of the whole afternoon. You're right, Gerald said. It was a small... Terms have changed from the original. Our equity position is larger now. Our fee reflects the interruption. And I want written acknowledgement from your board of Kane Capital's role in this deal before we recommit. Something crossed his face that might have been respect. I couldn't tell if it was genuine, or just the look a man gives when he realizes he's lost. That's fair, he said. One more thing, I said. He waited. Next time you need to reach me about something involving my work, you call me. Not Elena. Agreed. I stood, shook his hand, and walked him to the elevator. The downtown project closed 14 months later. Kane Capital anchored the institutional raise at just over $52 million. The full capitalization came in north of $380 million, the largest transaction in Whitfield Development's history. At the closing dinner, Gerald stood up to give a toast. He talked about the project, the team, the years it took to get there. Then he looked across the table at me and said, without hedging, without qualification, none of this happens without my son-in-law. Elena reached for my hand under the table. I looked at Gerald Whitfield and thought about a man laughing across a boardroom table. About 12 seconds and one text message. About what it means to build something so quiet, so precise, that by the time the people who underestimated you finally see it, there's nothing left for them to argue about. There's a particular kind of stillness that follows a moment like that. Not the cold kind. The other kind, the kind that settles in once something that needed saying has finally been heard. I held my wife's hand, raised my glass, and let the moment be exactly what it was.